to a brand new edition of Cover Story. I am Priya Sehgal, and this week we shall be talking to the Congress Party's battle-scarred Twitter warrior Shashi Tharoor. In this interview, the articulate Tharoor takes on the BJP's poster boy Narendra Modi tweet by tweet. With Twitter dictating the political grammar of the day, it is HRD Minister Shashi Tharoor who is raising the most exclamation marks as he takes on the BJP's poster boy Narendra Modi. A first-term MP, the novelist and former UN diplomat was the first off the Twitter block. He was forced to abandon the digital world when some of his tweets ran into controversy. But he got to have the last laugh, for when the Congress needed an effective wordsmith to take on the prolific Modi, it turned to none other than Shashi Tharoor. Hello and welcome to Cover Story. Mr. Tharoor, I'm going to begin with the current controversy, which is Narendra Modi. Why is the Congress allowing Modi or falling into his trap of letting him dictate the agenda?
Look, I think to some degree we'll have to blame you folks, because the media has built Modi up into such a larger-than-life phenomenon.
You didn't call him Rambo, you called him Rambo.
No, the Times of India called him Rambo. You see, the amusing thing about all this is the media sets the agenda for political discourse in our country, whether it's the print media, whether it's these talk shows and their shouting matches, and as a result the political parties have no option but to respond, because if we don't respond we leave unchallenged certain assumptions about the likes of Mr. Modi which we feel should be challenged. But he is being projected by some as some sort of development avatar, but he has a history, he has beliefs, he has actions for which he has never been properly held accountable. At least politically we should hold him accountable.
But it's first I'm going to challenge you on the media front. We follow what you say. You know, the Modi says something, then we have a briefing by Manish Tiwari in the morning, Ajay Makhan the afternoon, then Shashi Tharoor takes over. So we are only reporting.
No, Shashi Tharoor just happened to be on Twitter that day. In fact, my tweet was in the morning. You all asked me about it.
But yours made the most news.
But look, the fact is, look, he said something. He said it in a speech that you gave an inordinate amount of attention to. I mean, lots of politicians speak at universities and colleges. Very few get the sort of respectful, sort of full coverage of every word spoken and breathless analysis.
Rahul Gandhi, but he doesn't speak much otherwise.
No, but when he does, I don't think he gets full time. I mean, I remember him going to St. Teresa's College in Ernakulam in Kerala. I don't remember this kind of breathless coverage that we've seen of Modi's appearances at Shri Ram College, at Ferguson College and so on. No, there has been a very effective projection of Mr. Modi in an exercise in which the national media has also been complicit, and which leaves us in the Congress Party, who wish to resist Mr. Modi's advance, which is sought to be portrayed as an irresistible advance. We wish to resist it, and the only way we can do so is by reacting. So I reject your charge that we are allowing him to set the agenda. We are not allowing him and you to dictate the agenda on his terms. We are challenging the terms on which he is being portrayed.
But you know, this, your comment, we accuse Modi of polarizing votes, the Barkha of secularism. But you said shorts, fascism, I mean, that's an equally polarizing comment.
As I said at the time, it was an irresistible clothing metaphor. We didn't start the thing. He said burqa of secularism. And as far as the burqa of secularism is concerned, it immediately invites comparisons to other items of clothing. I mean, why did I mention the khaki shorts? Apart from the fact that they were, invented by Italian fascism, and indeed all the fascist movements around the world in the 1920s borrowed the idea of the shorts, whether it was Oswald Mosley in England, whether it was the RSS in India, whether it was other sympathizers of Mussolini. Invented by Italian fascism, and indeed all the fascist movements around the world in the 1920s borrowed the idea of the shorts, whether it was Oswald Mosley in England, whether it was the RSS in India, whether it was other sympathizers of Mussolini. This was the kind of uniform. It was just very common in the 1920s around the world. And so that history ought to be recalled. But equally, frankly, we should also point out that this was Mr. Modi's personal history. He was an RSS pracharak. He is not somebody who has been doing much for development until very recently. And what he has done is to reinvent himself as this decisive administrator, chief minister of a state, a man of the masses and so on. Let's also remind him that he has something else to live down. And I think it's also important that the voters, particularly young voters, who risk being deluded by this very selective portrayal of one aspect of Mr. Modi be reminded of the other aspects too.
But what does it say about the Congress? You know, even I've been going, say, the Delhi's drawing room, the middle class, people who actually would not normally vote for someone like Modi, who take the riots into account, but they say we don't have an alternative in the Congress. There is not a decisive decision maker. Manmohan Singh, who is supposed to be this great reformist economist, is actually becoming a, you know, a welfare, you made him into a dole kind
welfare
of
economist.
Welfare.
No, in fact, I can assure you that the economic policies of the government of India very much bear the Prime Minister's stamp and have done so.
But the
throughout
stamp
the 9 years
is
of
of economics of dole of welfare schemes. Where is the reform? You are running out of money. The rupee is falling. There is you are opening up FDI. Look at the state the economy is in.
Even the day that you and I are speaking, there's been a major reform in FDI and international trade.
Is it reform or is it the big Indian sale?
No. I mean, the question is, you said where is the reform? It's only welfare. My point is it's both things. It's both growth and distribution. The whole logic of the Congress party is we're not the India shining party. In other words, those who argued that only that India was shining but forgot it was only shining for a few. Nor are we like the communist left who say that they are for the poor, but who block every reform that can actually enlarge the pie for the poor.
So middle
What
of the
we
road,
are doing in the
kind
middle,
of
no, but our
you know
middle
what
of the
happens
road.
to people who walk in the middle of the road?
No, in the middle of the road, of course, if you only walk in the middle of the road, you might get run over, especially in India where everyone drives in the middle of the road. But our message is that we want to both work on growth and use the fruits, the benefits of that growth to help ordinary poor people who do not in our country have a social security safety net.
But
So
we
we've
don't-
done all these things. I honestly think that our best argument to the Indian voter is think back on the India of 9 years ago when we were not in power and think of the India of today, how much has changed, and are you not better off because we've been doing these things? And I would say a majority of Indian voters will find that they are better off.
I'm going to take a challenge and compare the India from 5 years to UPA 1 to UPA 2 basically. I think UPA 1 did much better than UPA 2. What do you have to say? All the schemes you mentioned are UPA 1 really, except for right to education, which has also missed its March 31st
Right to
deadline.
education and food security are UPA 2.
Well, food security,
RTI
that's-
and Mahatma Gandhi Nrega are UPA 1. And of course there are measures, the Indo-US nuclear deal was UPI 1.
Again.
Yeah. So you've got, what I'm saying is you've got interesting and important innovations and actions
In UPA 1.
in both.
But
No, in
UPA
both
2
governments.
is, what are you going to take to the people?
What
There's
is more
nothing.
decisive than coming up with the food security ordinance? You want decisive
Which
leadership
you
there?
rushed at the last minute, 6 months before the elections, because you know
Well,
that.
it's actually 9 months before the elections as far as I'm aware, but still. Look, the point is, you know, this word decisive masks a certain fondness for an authority figure who will lay down the law, as it were, for the country.
A leader.
Well, I think there are various forms of leadership. In many ways, the most effective form of leadership in the 21st century is a leadership which doesn't leave a personal mark, but which delivers results. Where the people who are being led say, gosh, we did it ourselves. That is ultimately the most effective form of leadership. As a leader in my own modest way, that's the way I like to function. I like to empower the people who work for me. I like to give them ideas. I like to inspire them where I can, and then let them deliver and let them take ownership of what they've delivered. That is the style that I practiced in my international career. That's the approach that I believe in. And I think, very frankly, the other kind of thing that says, I am the hero, I know everything, I will take decisions, I will tell you what to do, follow me, that is a mid-20th century style that frankly is no longer credibly practiced anywhere in the world, because the world is a more complex place, and those kinds of simple one-man riding on a big horse solutions are simply no longer acceptable to the vast majority of the democratically conscious public. So my argument against this decisiveness case is that a leader who persuades and brings people along may actually deliver more lasting benefits to the nation than a leader who claims to be decisive, gives orders, and finds that his orders are not palatable, or not welcome, or not followed, or not implemented by others. You know, it was, sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to interrupt you because we have, for instance, we are talking about Modi and Rahul Gandhi here. We have a visible leader, and what you're saying, maybe you know, he's setting example, empowering people, but he's really not visible. He is missing really. But at least with Modi, we can judge something. No, we have him, Gujarat to judge him by, right? You know, you can take the riots, you can take the development, whichever part you want to. But there is a model. For Rahul, where is the model? He himself comes on the stage and when he speaks, he says, the systems are not working, we have to set the systems right. You have 10 years yourself as an MP to set the systems right. Forget, the whole history of Congress ruling India. So, if you have a helpless leader versus someone saying, I am here, I have the solution, who would you vote for?
You have to first ask, does he really have the solution? You see, I mean,
Gujarat is doing well.
But Gujarat has frankly done well before Mr. Modi. It's done well before the BJP. And I have no doubt it will do well after Mr. Modi also. The Gujarati people are an entrepreneurial people. Look around the country, look around the world, you'll find Gujaratis thriving everywhere. All I want to stress is that instead of saying that because Gujarat is doing well, India will do well if we just import the chief minister and make him prime minister, you're falling into a complete logical fallacy. There's a number of reasons why it's a fallacy. Number one, in Gujarat, it's a one-party rule. It is inconceivable under any electoral outcome that one party will rule in India for the foreseeable future. For 20 years in this country, it's been the art of managing coalitions, bringing different points of view along. Can somebody who's used to one-party rule and has never shown a capacity to be anything other than the so-called decisive authoritarian figure manage that? In other words, can he therefore deliver results? Second, in Gujarat, this is a gentleman who not only did everything through one party, but very often through one man himself. At one point in his own career as chief minister, he's held all 9 key portfolios himself. You can't do that in the national level. It's not possible. Third, all of India is not Gujarat. He starts off with an entrepreneurial people with a basic level of education, a basic infrastructure, and he does reasonably well in progressing with those givens. The givens in other parts of India are not the same as the givens in Gujarat. How easy is it going to be for him to replicate for the whole of India what he has done in Gujarat, if you even accept the proposition that everything in Gujarat has been done by him, which I don't? How can he replicate it when the basic parameters that you're starting with are different in different parts of India? Fourth and most important in the conceptual answer to your question, India is a very diverse country. Gujarat is much less diverse as a state. After all, it's one culture, one language, one cuisine, and a couple of religions granted, but the fact is that it is essentially a much more homogeneous place than India is. India is a land of astonishing diversities. Caste, creed, culture, cuisine, consonant, costume, custom, everything is different all over the country. How does a man whose decisiveness masks a single-minded pursuit of one approach manage to seek credibly to govern a country of such diversity? Don't you need someone who actually appreciates that diversity, who doesn't come and say, I have all the answers, but who comes and says, tell me what you think we should be doing, I'll listen to you, I know these things aren't working very well, I'll try and solve it. If that's the approach that Rahul Gandhi is taking, I think that should be applauded. One final thought on your comment about Rahul Gandhi, he is not in government. Modi happens to be in a state government. Rahul Gandhi is not in the government. He is a party official. He spent many of the last few years concentrating on reforming and reviving the Youth Congress, and now he's got since January this year, he's got the overall Congress vice presidency. So you can't entirely judge him by actions in government when he has not actually had an opportunity.
But whose fault is that? Manmohan Singh has repeatedly said, please come, and I'm ready to vacate the Prime Minister's chair, take any ministry of your offering. Rahul is... So we have this image of a very reluctant leader. And as for his success in Youth Congress, that's very debatable, but let's leave that out for now.
I think, you see, you're looking at what the task he set himself was to revamp the organization, create an electoral culture, because we don't have enough intra-party democracy in any of our parties.
Right. Okay, you haven't answered my question of the reluctant leader.
Look, I can't really speak for one individual. He'll have to tell you himself whether he's reluctant or not. I would give you the answer that I see, that is that he seems to have focused on the tasks that he has set himself, and when the time comes for him to take on another task, he will focus on it with the same kind of determination that we have seen him approaching his task so far.
But, the time is now. This is the age of perception. You can't keep hoping one day Rahul will deliver. There have been so many soft launches of brand Rahul. Every time he does something, he becomes the general secretary. Everybody says, oh, Rahul has arrived. He takes on a responsibility. UP elections. Wow, Rahul, making of a leader. Heir finally apparent.
But he's actually been very active as Vice President of the Congress. I mean, he's held meetings with all the PCC chiefs. He's held meetings in groups with all the MPs from each state.
You're patting him for doing something he ought to be doing anyway.
But I'm just saying, it's not that he's been sitting back and relaxing or disappearing as is often alleged. He's doing things that by definition are not visible because they are about the party structure and the party organization. They're not for public television media consumption. So he's met, for example, he has met with groups of MPs from every state. He's met with PCC chiefs. He's gone off and supervised relief activities in disaster zones. He has done a number of things which don't necessarily lend themselves to television and theatre, but to be honest, are very effective and very focused and take a lot of his time and attention. So to my mind, something like this ought to be seen as him doing what he set himself to do. Let's see if there's some other task that the nation entrusts him, and I'm sure that he will do it with the same level of dedication, energy and time.
But the nation, or at least the Congress part of the nation, wants him to be Prime Minister. He's still not saying yes.
Well, look, this is a debate I don't want to get into, because to be honest, when the party wants to announce a prime ministerial candidate, it will do so. It has not yet done so. Obviously, you're right that many would like to see the torch being passed to a younger generation, symbolized and led by Rahul Gandhi. As somebody who's sort of in the generation between the present leadership and Rahul Gandhi's, I certainly very much tend to endorse the need to recognize how young our country is. With 65% of our population under 35, is already a majority youthful nation. So the gap between the average age of the cabinet and the average age of the population is already too large. We need to narrow it, and the time to do it may well be after the next election victory.
Okay, we'll see when that happens, if the Congress is in a place. But moving on to something you may like to talk about, Twitter. Do you feel somewhat vindicated? I mean, you were the first one off the block, and then, a lot of your colleagues came down heavily on you. And
yes, I remember the then BJP President, Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, saying too much tweeting can lead to quitting. Turned out to be quite prescient, but that's another matter. The fact is that, there was a lot of resistance to this unfamiliar communications medium. Though I have to say, initially, when there was first a newspaper report somewhere that Tharoor crosses 10,000 followers, a lot of very serious politicians asked me, how do you manage to get these 10,000 followers? Tell us about it, how do we do it? And there was a lot of interest. But within a day, I must say, the mainstream media went after me so powerfully, and indeed political elements went after me with the connivance of people in the mainstream media, that everyone thought that going on Twitter was a guarantee of attracting controversy, so everyone backed off. And as a result, I think the adoption of social media by politicians took a setback, which it took a little while to recover. But after that, not only has it recovered, as you know, it's been a roaring success. The BJP has made such a celebration out of Mr. Modi overtaking me that one almost wants to think, wants to see some sort of Ben-Hur race, which it's not. But the leader of the opposition is on Twitter. We have many ministers on Twitter, including my Human Resource Development Minister, the Congress's communications chief. We've got lots of voices out there, and so it's become a very important and legitimate place to respond to the public, to answer questions, and to show your accessibility. The interactivity of social media is what makes it so interesting for a politician.
Yeah, don't you find Twitter is now setting the debate of the day? It's not, it's not us also. It's not even television.
No, I think what has happened is you all made your peace with social media by mining it for stories. Earlier you saw it as a threat. The first reactions against me were, who does he think he is to talk above our heads to the people directly on a social medium? Why can't he come to us if he has something important to say? When they realized that the floodgates could not be kept back, they couldn't keep pushing the waves back from the shore, the media said, let's do the next best thing, which is let's see what's being said on social media and use that for our stories. So now everyone has come to a very comfortable arrangement. We say what we want to on Twitter. You all read it and make news stories on TV and the print media out of it. And there is a mutual interchange. In fact, very often, the story gets bigger because of the mainstream media. After all, social media reaches 10-12% of the Indian population.
So has the Congress actually appointed you Twitter-in-chief?
No, that's nonsense. In fact, we have a very effective communication cell led by Ajay Markan. There is a social media cell led by Dipinder Huda. I'm not a member of any of these. It so happens that I'm a congressman who has a reasonably large following on Twitter. And so once in a while, yes, I'm prepared to use that following to get out the party's messages. That's natural. We're entering into an election cycle before too long, and it's natural this will happen. I don't think that everybody who follows me to hear Congress party views, and so I'll also tweet on cricket, and I'll tweet on mangoes, and I'll tweet. That's natural. We're entering into an election cycle before too long, and it's natural this will happen. I don't think that everybody who follows me to hear Congress party views, and so I'll also tweet on cricket, and I'll tweet on mangoes, and I'll tweet on books I'm reading, and I'll tweet on interesting articles I've come across on other subjects, and all of that stuff, which I'll continue doing. This is not just a party vehicle. But yes, once in a while I will take pot shots at the BJP or other, the left and others. I had a ferocious counter-attack on the Hartal of the left in Kerala last week on Twitter. So I'll use it for political purposes to advance my beliefs, my values and my party's agenda. Why not?
You've come a long way. Remember that famous cattle class comment that was misunderstood? What have you learned since then? Because clearly you're more successful now than you were then.
Yeah, be very careful about humor, especially humor that doesn't translate very well. Because cattle class sounds even worse when you get it into Gujarati and Malayalam and Hindi and so on, which is why it's done me so much damage, even though it's actually a very old phrase that I didn't invent. It's been around the English-speaking world for 30 years. Second, that it was used by the journalist to ask the question I was replying to. It was not something that I injected into the exchange. And third, that it doesn't even insult the passengers, it insults the airlines for treating us like cattle. But I've never been given the benefit of any of this. To this day, there'll be some attack on me for this expression. So I realize it's simply not worth assuming, that maybe because somebody who asks you a question obviously knows the meaning of the word, and you answer it, you completely forget you're unleashing something into a very public space. And it's no longer a dialogue between the two of you. It's a dialogue you've got to be prepared to have. 1.8 million people over here, and then multiply and put on the mass media where it will be even further liable to distortion. So be very careful about what you say that could be misunderstood. And I think in the last 2-3 years, I'm fairly confident I haven't put a foot wrong so far in my choice of things to say or to joke about.
Well, that's one of the lessons learned. But moving on to your ministry, HRD, there have been a couple of controversies. One is, of course, this famous 4-year course. You've been defending it, but you've not really been saying I'm for it or against it, but you're defending the decision.
I'm defending the principle that ministers and bureaucrats should not be telling university vice-chancellors how to run their academics. Because for me, the precedent that we would set, suppose we didn't like the decision, and we decided to overrule it, the precedent we would set would be extremely dangerous for academic freedom in this country.
Isn't that what the ministry is for? To make sure that there is so much popular anger against it. I mean, you and Stephens, you did a 3-year course. Did you find anything wrong with that?
Well, look, frankly, I spent more of my 3 years in extracurricular activities and debating and being president of the union and so on, rather than the classroom. So to my mind, I would have been quite happy spending more time doing all of that. But no, look, the fact is not that. The fact is there are some universities in the country already that offer 4-year degrees and some that offer 5-year degrees, as we know, the IITs and so on. And Delhi University wants to experiment with something which actually they do have the time to refine, because the kids who are entering university now have still 3 years to go before they get to the first 4th year course.
Okay, and this famous, the only one thing that UPA2 has achieved was this education for all, which was announced at the beginning of UPA2.
It's not the only thing we've achieved, but all right.
Okay, I would still go with that.
No, I've just talked about the food security ordinance.
But it's still not happened, and again,
ordinance has happened.
The ordinance has happened, but the act has to be rolled out. It has to be actually reach the poor, which is actually the problem with most of your schemes. Is they don't, in implementation is where you go wrong. Same for education for all. It's missed the March 31
That's actually
deadline.
an objection to the Modi approach, not the Congress approach.
No,
it's the Modi who seems to have no idea that between the proclamation of a policy in Delhi and implementation on the ground, there is a very, very long shadow that requires diligent pursuit of persuasion, of involvement, of engagement, and of results. We just not going to have sort of, the chief minister going around district to district with a laptop, which is the image that is sought to be pursued. He can't do that in a country this size, with the scale of the problems he has to deal with, and that's the objection.
Okay, speaking of Modi, Congress has come down very heavily in his charging ₹5 for his rally, but it's money that is apparently, I'm told, is going for the Uttarakhand relief. What is wrong with that?
How large will his rally be? Let's say 10,000 people. So we'll get 50,000 rupees for Uttarakhand.
They're claiming more than ₹1 lakh.
Acha, so we'll get 5 lakhs for Uttarakhand. I mean, each MP has given 10 lakhs or more.
Fair enough. This is just adding to the kitty. Why not? Let the Congress.
That's fine. It's just that we find that the hawking of the value of a politician to be slightly demeaning. And as Manish Tiwari and others have pointed out, if a politician is valued at 5 rupees and the movie ticket costs 200, we get a pretty good idea of the relative value that Mr. Modi brings to his audience.
And the entertainment value.
And the entertainment value.
Apart from that, speaking of entertainment, you've been at the UN and now here at the Parliament of India. What was the transition like?
Huge. I mean, it's a totally different world. I mean, there's almost no comparison.
How did
the
you
only
react
moments that seemed
people?
really vaguely familiar were when I was in the Ministry of External Affairs, where the issues I dealt with, the files that came across me, some of the things I had to do were similar to what I'd done in my UN life and in my UN career, particularly in recent years, and so that was very familiar. But with the exception of that, political life, going to seek the votes of the masses, winning an election, maintaining a constituency relationship, meeting the public every time, hearing their grievances, pursuing their petitions, going to lobby ministers for your constituency, going to lobby ministers for your constituents. All of this is completely new to me. It's been a very, very interesting experience of on-the-job training, on-the-job learning. And I found it hugely, I mean, it's like, anybody in their 50s starting a second career is going to find this to be a hugely challenging and rewarding experience because it's so different from anything you've done before.
Have you rushed to the well of the house yet? Have you?
That I will never do. In fact, MPs are taught when they first become MPs that you will not shout slogans, you will not wave placards, you will not march to the well of the house, you will not speak out of
Lesson
turn,
clearly
you will
lost.
not even turn your back on the speaker. And I have taken a solemn oath, I am not going to do any of those things. Even if one day, if God forbid, my party asks me to do it, I will disobey my party. I think it is wrong. I think it is shameful when Parliament is treated in this way. It's supposed to be the temple of our democracy. It's a place where you're supposed to debate the issues and values. And having seen the disgraceful performance of those who have made Parliament and the taxpayer lose so many days of hard work, I promise you I'm never going to do that.
My last question, I'm going to ask you now to wear your author's hat. And this current political scenario, this Rahul versus Modi fight that we're seeing, if you were to write a book on it, what would you call it? You already had the great...
Democracy versus authoritarianism is what it looks like at the moment. Let's see if we can do better than that in time to come. But I know who India will choose in the end, and it won't be the simplistic solutions from the autocratic figures. That, I think, frankly, has never been India's way, and I don't think it's going to be in the next election.
I know, but it has been India's way. I won't come back with you on this. Whether there is a Vajpayee or a Indira Gandhi, when there is a visible leader, people do tend to go for that leader. Whether it's the Manmohan Singh versus Advani, our debates have, our elections have become more presidential.
Vajpayee ji was hailed as a conciliator, as a coalition builder, as one who worked with the opposition. The one time that Indira ji tried to be autocratic and dictatorial, that was during the emergency, she got rightly turfed out by the voters at the first opportunity. So the truth is, no, India has no patience for that kind of a
Mayawati, they all dictate, they have a dictatorship.
You can work at the state level. It can't work at the national level. We'll see.
Okay, we'll see. I'm going to come back to you with the answer when that happens.
Sure.
Thank you for talking.
Talk to you after the election.
Done. Thank you so much.
All the best.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Well, that was the author of the great Indian novel launching a very articulate defense of the Congress party against Narendra Modi. That is all for this week. Thank you for watching Cover Story and see you again next week.